Alright folks, I got a little bit of a story to tell here. You can see there's a DRZ4S in the garage now, so I'll tell you the story behind that. So basically, I had a T7 this year. I've had a few bikes over the last few years, of course. I've been trying to find something that's like relatively lightweight but good off-road, and you kind of get caught up in that twin cylinder stuff because they're a lot of fun and they sound great and they're great on the road and all that. But I kind of decided, I'm usually doing kind of more dual sporty stuff where I'm riding my bike just to go off-roading, and I'm mostly on gravel roads and stuff. So off-roading with the T7, doing anything kind of challenging was a lot of work. Picking up the bike 10 plus times a day is very exhausting. And then you have the risk of course, a 400 plus pound bike falling on your leg and breaking your leg and all that fun stuff. So I found too, I was a little bit afraid to do some stuff that would get me further in the bush and kind of exploring more as well. There's some things that, you might be able to get across on a dual sport, but on an adventure bike, unless you're Paul Torres, you're not getting there. So got me thinking, I want something lighter. Probably a single cylinder again. I'm kind of more of a single cylinder guy, although I love twins. Like, I would love to have a twin adventure bike, more for BDR style stuff. We're on dirt roads and stuff like that. But for the off-road, single cylinder is the way to go for me. So I was looking at the KTM 390 Adventure. I was like, this thing kind of seems pretty unicornish. It's 400cc, it's got 40 horsepower, which is pretty good. And, it's got wind protection. It's got, reasonable suspension, all that kind of stuff. So I put a deposit down on one in May, sold the T7. I went through most of the summer without a bike because every month they're pushing it back. Oh, it's coming next month. It's coming next month. It's coming next month. I got to the point where I was in September and they're like, oh, it's not coming till October. And I was like, okay, I'm done with this now. And I had started to also see a lot of issues cropping up with the fueling. And some quality control problems and stuff like that. So, that as well kind of pushed me to cancel my deposit on the 390. And I ended up getting a KTM 690, a used one, Enduro R. My buddy was like, the 690 for you is probably the right bike. You like power, but you want something lightweight. 690 is a great fit. And he had a 690 before, previous generation that was 5-speed. So I got this 2019 KTM 690. I rode it. I think I didn't even make it to 200 kilometers on it before it broke down and left me stranded. My wife had let me, have the evening off to go de-stress and bike. So I was like, all right, I'm going to go down one of my favorite trails in the mountains. It's, it's about an hour and a half away just to get down that trail. And so I was on the road there, and sure enough, the bike just completely dies on me. It was blowing a fuse, and it just kept blowing the fuse when I turned the ignition on. So I had to call my wife to come rescue me. This is 10 p.m. at night. It's pitch black outside. I'm by myself in the wilderness. Super fun time. And my wife kind of makes it there probably around midnight. She's got to wake the kids up, load them up, come rescue me with the bike carrier and stuff. And we get home at 2 a.m. Got to go to work the next day, so that was fun. So I fixed the KTM. It ended up being the fuel pump had gone on it, and this is my first KTM I've ever had, and I was like, all right, I think regardless of whether they're actually more reliable than this, I'm done with KTM. That's going to be my first and last KTM. So I ended up trading it in for this DRZ4S. I got a good trade deal. The dealership I worked with was probably the best experience I've ever had at a dealership in my entire life. They didn't try to rip me off. They didn't try to pull any tricks on me. So kudos to them. If you're in Edmonton or Calgary, it's Riverside Motorsports in Edmonton. They treated me really well. I was very impressed. Anyways, so I got the DRZ4S, and I want to talk about why it fits well for me. And it may apply to you, it may not. Other people may have other purposes for this bike. And why I decided to go with this instead of the 390. Spoiler alert, a good chunk of it's the Japanese quality and reliability. But so I've had a few. How many Suzukis have I had? I've had a couple Suzukis in the past, and they've treated me well. Like my DR650 is probably one of my all-time favorite bikes. and I ended up selling it just because we needed some money when we had our first kid. But now we're doing okay for money, so I can get a new bike, which is nice. This is my second new bike that I've ever purchased. I bought a KLX 300 brand new, and that was a good bike, but it just lacked a little power. Like if it was a 350cc and had like another 5 horsepower and 5 torque or something like that, it would have been perfect. It was a nice, had good ground clearance, but it was still relatively low seat height. It was a really good bike, honestly, and my buddy still has his KLX 300, so we'll go riding with that, and we'll probably compare the two, maybe do a video comparing the KLX 300 and the DRZ4S. But either way, I was looking for more power. So I kind of settled on this. I think I'm going to be happy with it. I haven't taken it for a ride yet. I need to insure it and register it still. So I've just kind of putted around on it a bit, and so far it's working just fine. But yeah, so I think my number one concern with this bike, with the redesign from the DRZ400, was that Suzuki didn't put a 6th gear in. They didn't change the gear ratios, and they also didn't change the gearbox. So basically we're left with the same gearbox that the DRZ400 had for like 20-25 years or whatever. People have been asking for literally decades to have a 6th gear in this bike. The predecessor to the DRZ400 had 6 gears, so the DR350 actually owned one of those, and it was a wonderful off-road bike. I probably should have never sold it, but it was a kickstart, and when you're kind of like in an awkward position, you've dropped the bike off-road and you're in an awkward kind of position, it's pretty hard to kickstart a bike sometimes. So I kind of wanted something with electric start. But I do kind of regret selling that bike. It had good suspension, it was good power, and the gearing was actually pretty good. So yeah, we've almost kind of gone back in technology. We're still at the 5-speed. I'm a little bit miffed about that, but I think the reason for that is that Suzuki gave their R&D department, X amount of money, and they said, our primary goal is to have this bike legal in as many countries as possible so we can have more sales. So you need to make the engine meet emissions requirements, and then anything above and beyond that is great. So, and of course they need to redesign, make the bike look a little better, all that kind of fun stuff. It's kind of standard. So yeah, they did modernize the bike. Everything's LED on it, the signals, the headlight, and actually the headlight actually looks pretty good in person. I thought it kind of looked silly in pictures, but actually looks better in person. The bike in general looks better in person, I think. But yeah, so they said modernize this. So they ended up spending a lot of money redesigning the parts of the engine, like the valve train, and now this thing has 2 spark plugs for better ignition and all that kind of stuff. It's got a catalytic converter in the header pipe, and then I think it's just in the European countries that has a second catalytic converter in the exhaust pipe at the back for Euro 5 emissions. But I'm pretty sure here in North America we don't have that, but I can't confirm. Maybe in there. But yeah, so they focused and spent all that money on that, and I think that's where all that money went, and I think we're kind of stuck with that 5-speed. I kind of wish they changed the gear ratios at least, and had like a nice low 1st gear, and then a taller 5th gear, just so that you could do a little bit more highway cruising. From what I understand, watching a lot of reviews and people's impressions of the bike, it seems that they kind of made up for it in a little bit, in the sense that the engine is a lot less vibraty. It's a lot more smooth, and you can get up to higher. It's also, the way it works is you can get power in the higher RPMs than you could on the DRZ400. So you can ride at those higher RPMs on the highway for if you're getting from A to B or whatever, and it's not going to be wholly uncomfortable. So that's good. So that's at least a small win. And the engine does seem pretty smooth. Seems pretty good from my little putting around I've been doing on it. Yeah, so I think they kind of had some wins and losses redesigning this bike, but it's still, you have to remember, this is a dual sport. This isn't an adventure bike. This wasn't purpose built it as an adventure bike. I think Suzuki could have done a lot better if they had purpose built it as a dual sport / adventure bike, where you could have had a model like this that's more basic, and then you could have had like maybe a model that's a couple $1,000s more, and you get the like a rally fairing, bigger tank, maybe wider seat, that kind of stuff. That would have been a huge win, and I think they would have, even with the 5-speed gearbox, if they had done that, they still had a chance to do it. But if they had done that, I think they would have sold them. They wouldn't have been able to like make them fast enough. to sell them. And I see a lot of these actually kind of sitting around dealerships because people are so spec sheet oriented, tunnel vision, which is fair because the specs are kind of like a peek into how a bike works, but you kind of actually have to ride a bike to see how it feels and how things work out and all that. So I think that'll be kind of in the future. We're going to do more of a review once I have somewhere between, maybe I'll do like 1,000-kilometer review and a 5,000-kilometer review, that kind of stuff. But because I'm keeping this bike long term, I'm not going to be jumping around with bikes anymore. This thing's staying in the garage, and then the next bike I get way down the road sometime will be kind of more touring oriented, like a maybe like a V-Strom 1050 or something like that. So basically, for my purposes, I'm more off-road oriented. When I go to de-stress at the end of the day, I go on dirt roads. I get out of the city onto the dirt roads. I'm not going, maybe going 100 kilometers, 120 on the dirt roads at most. Most of the time, I'm not going that fast. So this bike is good for that. And it's also good for the weekend trips I do. I've got little kids, so if I'm lucky, I get away for a day ride. So, I'll put the bike on the bike carrier, go to some trails with a buddy, and go riding all day. This bike's perfect for that. You can ride it to the trails, of course. If I get away for a morning or something, I can ride it up into the mountains, go ride for a few hours and come home. That kind of thing. So it's perfect for me. I also have grown to appreciate when a bike comes more sorted in general, but also with suspension. So this bike has good quality suspension in it. I'm not going to have to upgrade it, and that saves me a lot of money, time, effort, headaches, all that kind of stuff. So I really appreciate having good suspension out of the box. And I appreciate not having to replace the headlight, signal lights, all that kind of stuff. It's all good from out of the box. Basically all this bike needs, in my opinion, is hand guards, which I have, and I'm going to put them on. It needs a good skid plate. I'm waiting for someone to design a skid plate that goes over the rear linkage, just to protect the rear linkage from impact. I haven't seen one yet that protects the rear linkage, so I'm hoping AXP will make one. And then a rear rack, just for putting luggage on. I'm going to put a couple fuel bottles on the back. I've got 3 liters worth of fuel in my 2 fuel bottles. So that should get me to 12 liters of fuel capacity, which should get me to around 300 kilometers or maybe even more of range on this bike. As it sits, this gas tank is 8.7 liters. It gets maybe 3.5 liters per 100 kilometers based on my research on average. So you're going to get probably somewhere between 200 and 240 kilometers of range on this bike, which is kind of on the low end for me. Where I live, I have to ride an hour just to get to the trail. So, I rode my buddy's KLX 300 because I was bikeless this summer, as I had mentioned before, and it has 200 kilometers of range, and I was pretty sure I was on fumes when I pulled into the gas tank, because when I filled it filled up to actually like literally 9 liters. And that's a 9-liter capacity tank on that bike, if I remember correctly. But anyways, I had used the whole fuel range. Like, there's no fuel left in it at all, and we barely made it back. So, and that was just kind of like a 3/4 day ride. It wasn't even a full day ride. So I think you need about 300 kilometers of actual range in a dual sport, so that you're not having fuel anxiety, you're not having to bring fuel bottles and stuff. But I'm not entirely sure if I'll end up buying a new tank for this. I probably will, knowing myself, but I would like to see an IMS tank built for this that adds, 3 more liters of capacity. That would be perfect for this bike. If you could have 12 liters of fuel capacity on this bike, that would be perfect in my opinion. And then if you're going on a longer trip, you could just bring a fuel bag or fuel bottles if you needed like 400 or 500 kilometers of range. So, yeah. So fuel capacity is okay. It could be better. The seat I find uncomfortable. It's better than like my DR650, where it was like literally hard foam and it's like sitting on a 2x4. Like when people say that, they're not kidding. It's kind of like sitting on a piece of wood. This one is a little bit more squishy, but I still found I was literally sitting on it for like 5 minutes. I was like, yeah, this is kind of getting uncomfortable already. It is a dual sport, so you're not going to be sitting on the seat all day. You can probably get away with an hour riding each way sitting on the seat, which is fine, but I'll probably end up upgrading the seat down the road to a seat concept just for that extra comfort. So there will be some upgrades to the bike over time, but nothing crazy. I'm not going to go super duper nuts on this bike. I don't think, at least in the short term. In the long term, I might add a bunch of stuff, but Probably should put some radiator guards on it at some point as well, just to make sure rocks don't puncture the radiator, especially since it's an off-road bike and you're behind people that are shooting rocks all over the place. Yeah, so I think the fueling on this bike is good. I was riding it at low speeds. There was no kind of hiccups with the fueling. It's actually very nice. So I'm kind of happy in that respect, because I know the KTM 390 has just got the crappiest low-end fueling. So I'm happy that the fueling is kind of sorted on this bike. It probably runs lean just due to the emission stuff. So I could see possibly adding a fuel controller or doing an ECU reflash at some point, but I don't really plan on replacing the exhaust on it. I think I'm just going to leave it stock. It's relatively quiet stock, and that's kind of a good thing for a dual sport in my opinion. I mean, if you like to be loud, that's fine, but I think like they're pretty loud on the highway anyway if you're going at speed, so like vehicles should probably still be able to hear you, and you just still have your horn to honk at people or let them know you're coming by and stuff like that. That's one thing on this bike I do really like too while I'm talking about it, is the controls. So you have, I'm going to show you some stuff here. So on this bike, you actually have a pass. I call it a pass trigger. It's like my T7 had. So you can kind of flash people, which is super awesome. I love having that now that I've had it on the T7. You got your mode button here, and you got your pass and your horn, or your signal light and your horn. Mode button just gets you to your traction control modes and your power modes to change, and obviously you can use it to change other stuff too, but probably like your trip odometer stuff. I still got to read the manual to learn how to do that. Another thing I do like is it's one push start, so you can just push this button and it starts immediately. You don't have to hold it down, you just go bloop and it starts. And it also has a hazard light, so for whatever reason you do break down or you're pulled over on the side of the road, there's any kind of issue, you can put the hazard light on. I do really appreciate that as well. The clutch pull seems really good on this bike. It's very light, which is nice. One more thing I do want to change on this bike that I didn't mention before is the mirrors. You can already see the mirrors stick out further than the handlebar, and that's an issue for off-roading, because when you drop it, you're gonna break your mirror, and it can also break. Since the mirror's mounted on the reservoir for the brake, it could also theoretically like crack this or break it too. So you gotta be careful with that. So I'll probably switch it to something. I want something similar to the CF Moto mirrors, where they kind of hold their place this way, but you can just flip them back and forth like this. I can't remember the name of the company. The ones that use like the ram mounts, where you can move them all over the place, they suck. I had some on the 690 that I had, and they just fall. They get blown out of place by the wind and stuff. No matter how hard you try to tighten them, they're just kind of a pain in the butt. I didn't like them at all, to be honest. I wouldn't buy them again. Yeah, so it's a really good bike. I would have liked to see the seat come off easier, like a KTM, where you just have a little release for the seat, or maybe just having like a keyed open for the seat. It's bolted on with two, I think they're 8mm bolts. There's a little toolkit you can get into right on the side of the bike here. Just in here, you just flip this guy open. There's a little keyhole, and this piece of plastic comes off, and there's a 8 and 10mm little socket thing, and a JIS screwdriver with a flathead as well. It's enough to get the bike apart a little bit at least, but you're going to want a more comprehensive toolkit than that if you're doing any sort of remote riding especially. This bike retains the oil in frame kind of design that it had before. So the oil filler actually used to be over here, which was actually better because you could actually get at it easier. Now they put it like way back right behind the tank, and it's actually going to be hard to get in there. You're just going to need a longer funnel, I think. I haven't really had to do it yet, but we'll find out soon enough. So that's going to be a bit of a pain. But I think one thing, I can't say for sure, but I don't see the... there used to be like a oil hose that used to come down in the front here, and you used to have to undo that, clean a little screen in there and all that kind of stuff. I don't think that's there anymore, but I'll have to double check on that. But I don't see it, so I'm pretty sure it doesn't exist anymore. So it might just be the one oil filter just in here. So that's good. The brake discs are pretty big on this bike. You can see the rear brake disc is pretty big, and the front brake disc is pretty big. So this bike's not going to have any issues braking, I don't think. You've got a remote reservoir on that rear shock. Again, like the suspension on this bike is really good. I'm not going to have to replace the pegs on this, I don't think. I've got an average kind of width foot, but my feet are small. They're about 8.5 in length, so I've got little hobbit feet. But for me, my boot probably comes off about this much, which I don't really care about. I'm going to take these inserts out, but yeah, I think these foot pegs are just fine, at least for me. If you got monster feet, you might want wider ones, but yeah. What else is there to say about this bike? It's very handsome. I really like the gray with the gold fork. It's really nice looking. I apologize for my messy garage. I haven't had a chance to clean it recently, so I got to do another organization and clean. But yeah, it's a wonderful bike. If you're on the fence about it, I personally think it seems like a really high quality bike. That's my initial impressions, of course, because I haven't hardly ridden the bike at all yet. I think they have it pretty well sorted. Of course, there's those details like the 6th gear and stuff that I think a lot of us are miffed about. But I think they had to build this bike to a budget, and they wanted to build it to be able to be sold in more markets. So I can understand that from a business perspective. One thing I would like to quickly chat about too before I finish is the tires. So this is the front tire. They're knobbly enough for gravel roads and some off-road. I would prefer something like a TKC 80, like a 70-30 tire. I would say these are kind of like between a 50-50 and a 70-30. They're kind of like a 60-40 maybe kind of tire. But they're good enough. So I'm probably going to ride these and just see how they do. And if they're garbage, I'll take them off, but I think I'll still ride them and just until they're worn out. The rear tire actually looks pretty decent on the knobs as well. I'll try to show you that real quick if I can. So you can see there's a good distance between the knobs on the rear tire here. Like I can fit my finger in between, no problem and stuff. So there's some decent room in between the knobs on the rear, so I think it's okay. But if you look at these TKC 80s, I've got a fresh pair here. These will probably go on after I wear out those tires, or maybe even I'll put them on next year. But they're a little bit more luggy. They're more like a 70-30 tire. They're probably going to be better off-road. A good dual sport tire. So I think the tires on this are okay. They'll probably be good for most people. But yeah, I think that's enough ranting for me. It's been more than 20 minutes, so hopefully somebody gets something out of this video and enjoyed it. And you can look forward to seeing more videos on the DRZ4S, obviously, in the future. I'm going to be keeping this bike long term. Yeah, I'm basically going to be keeping it forever. I'm not going to stop bouncing around on bikes and just keep this. I mean, this bike is made in Japan. It's still the quality that I've seen on previous Japanese bikes that I've owned. And I feel like that's becoming more of a rarity as people try to cost cut these days and build bikes in China and Thailand and all that kind of stuff. So I think I'll be happy to keep this bike for a long time. But yeah, thanks for watching. Let me know what you think about the DRZ4S in the comments. Do you hate it? Do you hate how they redesigned it? Are you not going to buy it because it doesn't have that 6th gear? What do you think? Thanks for watching.